All right, guys, so we got an article that just came out from Rolling Stone about the big man himself, our big wet boy, Donald Trump. He is, his, like, strategy and line of attack on DeSantis is now in the media.
Yeah.
So this is the stuff that, like...
This is what they're plotting, anyway.
Him and his staffers behind the scenes are like, how are we going to attack this guy, bro? And they're like, this is what they came up with.
All right.
Crystal's going to tell you the specifics.
This is Rolling Stone. Swin Soupsang and Tim Dickinson. I know Swin. I don't know the other dude. Anyway.
Two names sounds so fake.
Swin is a good reporter. Like I said, I don't know the other guy. There's no judgment or non-judgment. I just don't know him. Okay, Trump is plotting how to kick DeSantis in the nuts. Here is his playbook so far. They've started charting out possible plans of attack. One person close to the ex-president says, this is where Trump kicks him in the nuts. The former president's determination to obliterate his rival underscores how unwilling Trump is to pass the torch, etc., etc. All right, so let's get to the details here. In the past 2 months, Trump has talked to political allies about effective ways to pummel DeSantis on both personal issues, recurring concerns about his quote-unquote likability and supposed charisma deficit, and on policy matters such as DeSantis' hawkish foreign policy, trade stances, COVID-19 posturing, closeness to the party's quote-unquote establishment, and past votes to slash the social safety net. Sources familiar with the matter tell Rolling Stone. So that's the top line. They go into some details here about some of the specific votes that DeSantis took, in particular when he was like a Tea Party member of the House, on efforts to cut Social Security and Medicare, on, you know, like hawkish stances. He helped give Obama fast track authority for TPP, things like that they want to go after him on. And then they want to paint him as the candidate of establishment figures like Mitch McConnell. This one they've been sort of telegraphing for a while, and you see this if you look in MAGA social media, you see this line of attack a lot. And then the other one is DeSantis has been going after, sort of passive-aggressively going after Trump on COVID, and Trump allies are wanting to paint DeSantis as basically like a flip-flopper, showing that he took the same actions as blue state governors at the beginning of the pandemic, that he said vaccines work and that you should get one, and that this is just basically like posturing for the crowd rather than some legitimate, genuinely held position. So that's what they got.
So let's go through these. Yeah. Let's start with one that I find most funny, which is Trump is going to attack DeSantis on his likability. Bro, you're Donald Trump. Like, at this point in time, his approval rating is 30%.
His people like him.
His approval's like 30% or 31%.
Actually, I just saw a poll that his approval rating jumped up like 20 points in the last month. Did you see that poll?
No, I did not.
I mean, it's just one poll, so who the hell knows? But I did see that his approval rating jumped up in the last month.
But it has always been the case for Trump that he has very high unfavorables.
Yes.
Even when he had like a half-decent favorable number, he had massively high unfavorables.
But not with the GOP base.
So, but just for him to attack anybody on likability is like beyond silly.
Yeah. Okay? Charisma, though, what do you think? You hear that one a lot.
I don't agree with that. It's funny because originally I did think, like, yeah, he's a little bit of a weenie. DeSantis is. Yeah. And he's clearly doing like a Trump impression. But the more he talks, the more like I watch him talk, the more I think he's actually like a pretty competent politician. He's not like Marco Rubio, who's a literal child. He's a boy.
I think he's got more going on than like Jeb and Marco, but I don't think he's a particularly compelling politician. Well, personally.
A lot of people will agree with you on that. I understand I'm in the minority, but I actually think he's a competent politician, and I think he's plotted his way around well. All right, so next, the one that stuck out to me was hawkishness. Yeah. You're going to go after him for his hawkishness. Dude, you're Donald Trump. Yeah. You ripped up the Iran nuclear agreement, which has brought us to the current crisis level that we're at right now. The Iran nuclear agreement was working. It was verified by the IAEA over 10 times. They were following the agreement to a T. You came in and ripped it up and then put us in a position where now, they're talking about, like, war with them or whatever, and Biden didn't get back in it, which was a terrible move. He should have jumped right back in it, and he said he would, by the way. He didn't do it.
Yeah, they really screwed the pooch on that one.
Yeah, so that's one. Trump continued the war in Iraq. He continued the war in Afghanistan. He massively escalated the drone war. In fact, earlier reports were that he increased it 432%.
I mean, he almost got us into war with Iran with assassinating
General Soleimani, which was one of the worst things that I remember when I woke up today, and I was like, oh my God, you're such a psycho. Because Soleimani was on the ground fighting ISIS at the time, right? He bragged about stealing the oil from Syria. Remember that? like, oh, we're occupying Syria, we're taking their oil. And they tried to do a coup in Venezuela. And John Bolton was his foreign policy advisor for a really long time.
So I don't disagree with you on any of this, obviously. But number one, you're assuming that, like, these particular policy facts matter to the GOP base, which we've never seen any evidence of. Number two, the big foreign policy divide emerging in the Republican Party is really over Ukraine. And Trump, even though we know that he actually was hawkish in terms of his position with regard to Russia, the rhetoric around Putin was much softer. And he sort of left himself enough of an opening to side with the, like, we should cut off aid to Ukraine side of the GOP. Meanwhile, DeSantis has sounded like a very traditional sort of conservative line on Putin and Ukraine.
To be fair,
so
though,
that is, if I had to guess where they're going to hit him, I would think it would be more on that front than anything else.
But to be fair, though, the polling in the country shows that DeSantis' position is more popular on Ukraine.
Okay,
the
but we're not
position is actually more
again,
popular.
We're not talking about the country. We're talking about the Republican base. And the polling in the Republican base is basically split 50-50.
Okay, so I just don't think that's too compelling a line of attack. I guess my point of disagreement here, the reason why I find this all so amusing, is that, like, Trump is going after DeSantis for stuff that Trump did and does. Like, oh, you're going to attack him over cutting Social Security, Medicare. You were just backing Kevin McCarthy, and Kevin McCarthy, one of the things he agreed to was, like, yeah, we're going to take the debt ceiling hostage, and we're going to cut Social Security and Medicare.
Right.
So he does this thing where it's like he attacks people for stuff that he's guilty of, if not more guilty of than anybody else. I mean,
yeah.
Again, even this whole thing where he used to be, like, sound kind of populist on economic stuff, his main economic achievement was a 2017 tax cut bill where 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%, and that bill incentivized outsourcing. We net lost hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs under Trump. So anything he throws at DeSantis, assuming DeSantis is even half competent,
right?
And my reading of the situation, at least because the evidence we have now is that he is at least half competent, is that DeSantis has stuff to fire back on this stuff. And the COVID thing, like, you say, oh, he's going to hit him as a COVID flip-flopper. I'll grant you that that's a more clever attack than just hitting him on, like, he's anti-vax, given the state of the base, you know?
Yeah.
But I think any attempt of Trump to go after DeSantis on this with the Republican base is going to backfire, because they just agree with DeSantis more on this.
Ironically, that's the one where the facts actually support Trump more,
100%,
and
100%.
it's the weakest of the lines.
100%.
But
I agree with that.
I think that all of the planned policy attacks on DeSantis suffer from one flaw, which is that the ship sailed long ago on Trumpism being about any sort of policy position.
Yeah.
And so that's just not what drives or animates the Republican base. If I had to pick one of these things as, like, the strongest line of attack, even though it's absurd for the former president, who's been the leader of the Republican Party for years and years now, to posture like he's anti-establishment, I actually think that is probably the most effective direction for him to go in. And to paint Ron DeSantis as, like, he's being propped up by the Murdoch empire and by Mitch McConnell and by these other sort of, like, establishment GOP figures that are using him as a Trojan horse to take the Republican Party back for the quote-unquote establishment, I think that's probably his best line of attack of these ones that are being floated.
No, it's funny because I totally disagree on that point for this reason. Trump, like, the candidate, when they say, oh, I'm anti-establishment,
yeah,
what they mean is, like, I still think the 2020 election was rigged, and I'm going to fight on that front.
Yes.
And so the candidates who were most, quote-unquote, anti-establishment from their perspective are the candidates who got their asses handed to them on a silver platter in the last election. So in a weird way, tying to DeSantis, to, like, Mitch McConnell and the other, like, establishment Republicans, I actually think that'll help DeSantis.
Well, this
because
comes
our core disagreement,
back to our core disagreement. I don't think they really care about that.
Which is, to what extent does the Republican base, Republican primary voters, to what extent will they care about electability? And my contention is, we just went 3 elections straight, 2018, 2020, and 2022, where there was no concern at all for electability, and they got destroyed every time. And so now, even if they care a little bit about electability, they'll be more reasonable. And, like, even going through, like, you know, I saw you and Sagar talk about an issue similar to this, and I went through the comments, and so many people were saying, like, you guys don't see it. Even some hardcore Trump guys have now abandoned Trump. He's just toxic. We don't like him. All he's doing is tearing down other people who are supposed to be allies in the movement. And I think that's a real thing out there. I think people look at him as an extremist. He can't just go out there and talk about terminating the Constitution every other day as if you're going to maintain your popularity numbers and your electability numbers when you do something like that. I just think the clock's run out on him. I think he's doing like a shell of himself impersonation of the 2016 version of Trump. And it's not there anymore. He doesn't have that normie touch.
I agree with you. He is a shell of himself. However, you and I both know DeSantis is not the only person who's getting into this race. And by the way, it's not even totally clear DeSantis is getting into this race. I mean, he's clearly afraid. All of these people are still afraid of Donald Trump. And so you've got all of these people swirling around. Once one of them gets in, a whole cascade of them is going to get in. And ultimately, you know, just like 2016, he probably doesn't even need a majority in order to win. So even if Mike Pence and Nikki Haley and all these other cast of characters aren't grabbing that much of the vote, the fact that they're eating into any of the open to another candidate but Trump wing of the Republican Party means that he's in the best position.
And now we come to our full agreement. I totally agree with that, because the only thing that could ruin everything and turn it back over to Trump is exactly what you just described, which is exactly what's shaping up, which is like 8 people with giant egos and zero chance to win jumping in, and all you got to do is chip away 2% here and 4% here and 1% here from DeSantis, and it's a wrap. And Trump wins the primary with 31% of the vote.
Right. And I mean, so there's been a whole conversation about evangelical leaders who've been some of Trump's key backers, whatever.
I covered this.
Well, they're not going with DeSantis. They'll go with Mike Pence. They will go with DeSantis. Hasn't been with them on abortion. So Pence jumps in and has a long-standing relationship with these people, is already on board with the national abortion ban. They're not going to back Ron DeSantis. They're going to be with Mike Pence, and that's a problem for him. And the other thing that I'll say is that a lot has been made of the fact, and I think understandably so, that there are a lot of big Republican donors who are backing other alternatives to Trump, but they're also divided. Freaking Glenn Youngkin, governor of Virginia, who is almost definitely running for president if you look at some of the moves that he's making right now, he's got a bunch of big donors behind him. So the fact that you have big money backing some of these candidates means that, number one, they're going to get in. Number two, they're going to stick around because they got the money to do it.
Yeah, on that point, we agree. But to go back to the evangelical point, I think you're half right. Because, so the evangelicals, you covered it, I covered it. Trump turned on them by calling them disloyal. He was talking about Robert Jeffers, but he was saying, you know, the evangelical Christians in general, very disloyal, how they've abandoned me and I got what they wanted. And, like, he also said, though, after the election was lost, that, like, one of the reasons we lost is because these people are psycho on abortion. They don't want any exceptions. They don't want exceptions for rape and incest and all that stuff. And so the thing that Trump doesn't understand is that you can go after an individual politician, somebody with power personally, and call them disloyal and, like, ruin their name. And that actually works, because then your rabid base turns on those people and then they fall in line. You can't go after, like, a whole movement. You can't go after evangelicals and then expect them to stay around. So I think that my guess is about the evangelicals, a lot of them will go to Pence, and polls show right now about 9% of them, which is solid, right? Yeah. But I actually do think some will go to DeSantis, because I don't think, as much as they pretend like they're crusading in their principle, Trump wasn't even the most socially conservative.
I think we're talking about two different things. The leaders, I'm saying, are going to go Pence.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. I mean, there might be a couple.
The flock might be different.
There might be I think you're generally right. I think probably most of them will go with Pence. I think some of them might actually go with DeSantis, or even some other schmuck who, you know, we're not conceiving of at the moment.
Yeah, very true. I mean, there are plenty of them who imagine themselves, like, have these savior complexes, think that they're, like, you know, destined for greatness or whatever. I don't know what these guys are thinking, but a lot of them think they're going to be the next president with absolutely no reason to believe that.
And to your point, even if it's Trump versus DeSantis versus Pence and that's it, Trump's the favorite, because you're splitting the vote between DeSantis and Pence. Even if Pence gets 5%, let's say, it's like that's enough to throw it back to Trump. So ironically, the Republican Party, if they get their stuff together, they need to be a little bit more like the ruthless, you know, people in the Democratic Party who like, when they needed to, they were all like, we're all dropping out, we're all endorsing Biden, we're all screwing Bernie and stabbing him in the back.
But
and seemingly they don't have that ability.
And we see, even with the Republican House caucus fight, like, AOC was out bragging about how quote unquote unified the Democratic Party is. Oh, great, wonderful, that's great, thanks. But, you know, clearly the Republican caucus is a lot less unified and a lot more interested in, like, they get the way that they can posture and appeal to their base, and they don't have the same interest in, like, let's just be part of a team. And so I don't think that they would fall in line in the same way that, like, Pete and Beto and whoever the hell else, Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren, like how they all played their part to do exactly what needed to be done to get Joe Biden. And I don't see it. Don't see it.
And I'm looking forward to, in the same way you have Trump versus DeSantis, I'm looking forward to, like, the Daily Wire versus Mug Club.
Yes.
Crowder. I'm looking forward to all of them.
It's all. I mean, those are really kind of the opening shots in this war, right?
It's happening. It's happening, and I'm gonna enjoy it.